You're listening to 94.4 FM Salford City.
You're listening to Salford City Radio 94.4 FM, the Friday Sports Show. With your host, Jimmy Petruzzi, bring you news from the local area and around the world. And we're very fortunate in this show to have interviews from the world's best athletes, sports people who work in sport across a wide range of disciplines, from coaches, trainers, psychologists. We also have a segment on this show. We interview people in the field of psychology and related fields. Some of those influential people in the field of psychology have come on board the show and shared an insight into their experience and expertise. Today we have a very fascinating guest who's going to speak to us about her journey thus far in her sport. It's a very challenging sport, no doubt. It's a fantastic sport, and certainly no doubt many people have sort of watched it, the sport in the Olympics, but we'll get more of an insight in terms of what goes on around the year in this sport. And she's also studied psychology as well, which is quite fascinating too. So Ashleigh Spiliopoulou, welcome to the show. Great to have you on board. Heptathlete, tell us a bit about how you got into heptathlon.
Hi, so I've been doing heptathlon now for about, I'd say, probably like 6 years properly, so since I was about 16. But what got me into it was I saw, as many young heptathletes I guess did, was I saw Jessica Ennis at London 2012. And I was just so inspired by what she was doing. Like, obviously she performed absolutely incredibly. So to run through what the heptathlon is, it's 7 events in athletics and track and field, which run across 2 days. So it starts with the 100 hurdles, then the high jump, then the shot put, and then the 200, and then we come back on the second day and we do long jump, javelin, 800. So yeah, I saw Jess, and the way she finished that 800 was just amazing, and I was like, I want to do that. And at that time I was just doing athletics for school, but I liked all the events, and I was quite natural at a lot of different things, so I was like, I may as well give it a go. And so then it's in this country there's actually a real lack of heptathlon coaches, so at first it was quite difficult to find somebody to coach all the events because it's such a juggling act. But when I got into sixth form, I found a good coach at Brunel University, so I used to travel there after lessons and stuff. So I started training, was really loving it, and then when it came time to go to university, I decided to go to Loughborough to study psychology, and also to train with a coach, David Feeney, who already had a good group of heptathletes. And it's just kind of grown from there, and I've just got stronger, faster, better, and I just love it. So yeah, Fantastic. That's kind of where I'm at now.
Fantastic. And what would you say your strengths are in heptathlon, Ashleigh? Are you okay to sort of share without giving too much away to your competitors? Do you have a specific event that you're sort of strong in, or you favour?
So my naturally, I guess I'm quite tall, and the jumps have always come more easily to me. So high jump is probably one of my favourite events, and then over the years I've got a lot better at long jump as I've got faster. So I think those were sort of my more natural events, and the ones that I always gravitate back to is I just love training for them, and that they're really fun and exciting, and the feeling of flying over a high jump bar is nothing else. But then also I really do love the javelin. But my more difficult events, I'd say, are shot put, because I just got really long levers and stuff, and getting them all coordinated in the right direction to power the shot put out has always been trickier for me. And then I've had to work quite hard on my hurdles and stuff, which is still sort of a weakness in a work in progress. But that's sort of where it is for me.
It's really interesting, and I can imagine that training is sort of no 2 days the same in one sense. I suppose it depends on the time of year, but if you can give us an insight, our listeners, into training, because I'm quite fascinated by how people train for heptathlete, because obviously you've got sports that require different energy systems, different different sort of muscle movement and biomechanic. And what's the training like, Ashleigh, for heptathlete in terms of for yourself? I mean, just give us a brief overview in terms of what you would do in training.
Yeah, so it's an absolute minefield, and I'm so lucky to have such a good coach who his programs are so detailed. Like when we get our program every 4 weeks for the next 4 weeks, it's like the level of detail and complication is just unbelievable. So I'm so lucky to have him for that. But essentially, he tries to sort of work it around the energy system. So on a specific day, like for instance on a Tuesday, so today I've got something that's more focused on that like explosive, high speed, intense sort of sessions, and we've kind of centered it around day one of the heptathlon. So today I'll do block starts from the hurdles, then I'll do a short high jump session, probably working quite technically on my run up, and then like some jumps off short approach, and then I'll do a shot put session, and then I have like a max speed session, so it'll be working on blocks on the bend for 200, and then whereas tomorrow I'll come back and I'll have like a more tempo based session, which is more geared towards the 800, and I'll do like a short gym session, but it won't be like explosive gym. So in a week we train 5 times a week with 2 rest days on a Thursday and a Sunday, and on a Thursday it's like you get like things like physio treatment, you might do some active recovery like maybe in the pool or something, but Sunday would be completely off. But yeah, so like within a week I'd do maybe 2 or 3 gym sessions. We'd fit in every event in the week. Sometimes I do hurdles twice a week because it's a more tricky event for me. But yeah, and then I have like a speed endurance session for my 200s, and then a more like tempo-based aerobic session for my 800. So there's a lot to fit in.
Yeah, absolutely. But, it's really, really fascinating. I think in terms of from a training point of view, it's really fascinating in terms of how you kind of taper for events and think, okay, well, you've got events that obviously you've got an aerobic-based event, an aerobic event, and then I suppose you've got your strengths as an athlete too. And I always wonder, do you sort of just maximise your strengths and sort of go for it, or do you sort of also train on the areas that you'd like to develop, or get a combination of all things type thing? I suppose that would be the challenge. But do you sort of find yourself actually sort of focusing on the areas that you're sort of really strong in, or do you sort of just balance the approach and just try and get as good as you can in every area?
Yeah, I think, like it is obviously a massive balancing act with heptathlon. The primary focus, I think, should be with all heptathletes is on power and speed, because the majority of your events require power and speed.
Of course,
and if you get that better, then everything sort of falls into place. Even the 800, at the end of the day, it's not a really long aerobic event. It still requires some speed in your legs. But I definitely think from my side of it, because I'm still developing as an athlete, and because I came to the sport later than a lot of athletes who would have been maybe doing it since before they were 10, for me, I'm trying to develop my weaknesses so that I don't have any weaknesses really, because I feel that if you can be solid across the events and have nothing which is a real Achilles heel, then it sets you up in a really good position for a heptathlon, where you never know what could go wrong on the day, you never know what the conditions will be. So if you can be solid across all the events, then you put yourself in the best position to sort of be able to cope with the chaos of a heptathlon.
Yeah, and that's really interesting stuff. And it's really interesting you say that, Ashleigh, because you mentioned before about being inspired by Jess Ennis, and I think it's really interesting that, because you look and think, okay, well, for example, the 800 you mentioned there, and how much of that is sometimes just mentally, if you're more of a power-based athlete, just sort of really pushing yourself and pulling that out of the bag on the day type thing. And does that play a big part, do you think, the mental side of it all, in terms of, okay, well, you might have certain strengths, but sort of that sort of mental strength and preparation plays a big part in certain events too? Yeah,
I think, like a part of like the heptathlon, an enormous part of it is mental. If you can like keep your head across the 7 events, and that's a massive part of it. I think, when you step out on that track at a national or international level, everybody there has trained exceptionally hard. Everybody is really gifted, and everybody like can perform on the right day in the right conditions. If what separates like the best from the rest, I think, is just having that mental strength and ability to just keep calm, stay focused, focus on like your key points and just be tough, I think, like, because you're always going to hit adversity. Like, it's very, very rare for a heptathlete to have the perfect heptathlon. There's always hiccups along the way, because you just got to balance 7 events. So I think, you know, if you can just be stronger mentally, then it just makes such a massive difference, and that's been something which I've worked on really hard over the years, and I continue to kind of work really hard on it.
And how much is sort of studying psychology, has that helped you at all, would you say? Actually, sort of,
Yeah, I definitely think that studying it has like opened my eyes so much to like how the brain works, and I think that kind of demystified it a little bit for me, because like I think within sport and maybe in the wider world in general, like you often hear like words like, oh, the champion's mindset thrown around, or like you know, you'll hear like talking about the best athletes in the world, and they're just built differently, they're just wired differently. And I think studying psychology has kind of revealed to me that like the brain is just a computer system. It's just made of like, you know, nerves and neurons and
84
stuff.
billion neurons,
and everybody has it within them to kind of channel their brain to work for them rather than against them. And I think that studying that and developing that understanding of how the brain works has really kind of contributed to me feeling more like empowered to be able to like channel my mindset into a competition.
Absolutely. Do you think, I mean, obviously it's sort of your career sort of at the moment, your primary focus, but do you maybe see yourself one day actually sort of moving into the field of psychology possibly?
I think it could definitely be something which I would be interested in. Like, more and more, I think, as I've realised how much it's helped me in sport, being able to, you know, channel my mental side of it and stuff, it made me realise, I was like, oh, this could benefit so many people, like so many people's lives could be so much better. So in that sense, I think it would be a really cool job to be able to help other people, to unlock kind of like more potential. Absolutely,
and even just sort of day to day, really, for people, just sort of, whether it be business, the skills are very transferable to many areas for sure, or just life in general. And you know, speaking of sort of mental skills training, are you okay to maybe share some of the things that you might do, or do you sort of do like mental skills training?
So as I've kind of grown up as an athlete, I've definitely tried. I've like worked with like a psychological skills mentor, and she used to like really help me by. But what we'd do is we'd have a set of truths which we would discuss. So, for instance, let's try and think of an example, but it would be like nobody, like everybody feels tired when they wake up on day 2 of a heptathlon. So don't allow that feeling of tiredness to kind of psych you out and make you feel like, oh gosh, I'm in a much worse position to everybody else. So it would be like, or she'd say often to me, like, feelings are clouds in the sky, or thoughts are clouds in the sky, they come and go, acknowledge them and move on. So like things like that, so truths, visualizations, they were really helpful for me in like my early years of athletics and heptathlon, because it helped me to really focus my brain and to almost stay calm and in the moment.
Absolutely.
And another thing that I would do is I would focus on my breathing quite a lot before big events. So when you feel like nervous, it was like recentering on your breath really, really helped me.
Absolutely.
And then as I've grown up a little bit more, and in the last only a couple of months, I've actually started working with a psychological skills coach called Matt Roberts, and he used to be a high jumper, and he's helped me so much, because rather than focusing on specific mental skills, he kind of takes a different approach, in that he said, like, rather than like adding to an already busy mind by adding mental skills and more things that you have to think about, he takes a more like subtractive approach, where he just says you already have all the tools that you need within you. So rather than feeling you need to do more, just be, in a lot of ways. And that really helped me, of almost like decluttering the mind.
Absolutely,
and saying, you know, thoughts, they're just there cluttering up, trying to like help you out, but all your experience and all your like feelings, they come from those thoughts. You're in control, and you can choose how you experience the situation.
Absolutely, yeah, and that's really interesting stuff.
That's been massive for me.
Yeah, and that's the sort of key, I think, to mental skills, is sort of tailoring it for the individual. What works for one person might not work as much, and you sort of find what works for you, I guess, and sort of run with it. That's the sort of I think key, at least in sort of my perception. But it sounds like definitely you've sort of the education you've had within psychology and the people you've worked with have sort of definitely contributed to your sort of progress. I suppose in your sport too, actually the sport you compete in, heptathlon, the margins are so fine, really. We're talking like it's really, really small margins between success and obviously where you sort of are in the field. And one thing sort of I think is quite interesting, really, sort of in terms of how the sort of mental side of it. How much do you think that's contributed? I know it's difficult to quantify. How much has sort of contributed. What would you say, how important has that been for you, the mental side as well as the physical training?
I think in a lot of ways it's almost been more important than the physical training, because with me, I like to throw in absolutely 100% to everything I do, and I've always sort of seen that correlation between the more work you put in, the better your results. And heptathlon, I think, and athletics in general, is maybe the first time I've experienced in my life where that doesn't always equate. More effort and more training doesn't always equate to better performances, because at the end of the day you have to back yourself and you have to be confident. Absolutely. And I think I could always analyse too much and say, oh, but I didn't quite get this right, or I wasn't quite ready for this, and as a result I could almost talk myself out of a performance. Whereas like now that I've sort of developed that better understanding of the psychological side and developed my mental toughness and all of those aspects, I now feel like when I go into a competition I can stand there fully confident that I can do this and that I belong on the track, and then as a result the performances are just so much easier. Like when you get out of your own head and just into your body, then you just flow, and people talk about like a flow state in sport, but more than anything I've found that when I can actually sort of step out of my thoughts and just let my body do the work, then actually the performances come from that. So I feel like the physical training is essential, but in order to show the fruits of your physical training, you have to have that mental side of it. So I think they come hand in hand.
Absolutely, yeah, no, absolutely. I think it's a great point, really. I think it's sort of all these areas are equally as important in their own way, for sure. And in terms of performance, what would you say your highlights have been thus far? I mean, I'm sure there's going to be many, many more in the years to come, but at this moment in time, Ashleigh, what would you say your highlights have been so far in heptathlon?
Yeah, so I think I've actually had like probably my biggest career highlight in the last week, because I was invited to my first British Championships, which was in Manchester last weekend, and it was part of the Olympic trials for obviously Tokyo, and it was just a really big occasion. It was the biggest competition I've ever done, and I actually got a bronze medal, which was unexpected, but also just like really exciting, because I think it just solidified to me that like it is all paying off and it's coming together. And I think one of the most exciting things of it was that I didn't feel like I performed out of my skin in every event. Like as I was saying with the heptathlon, the key is to be solid across the board, and like each of my marks in each event, they weren't big PBs every event. It wasn't really overwhelmingly amazing. It was just very solid, like close to my PB in every event. And then it came down to the 800, and I think to get the bronze medal I had to run 3 seconds faster than the girl that was in third. So I knew I had to, and our PBs were like 3.5 seconds apart, so I was like, right, I've got to really run here. And it was just such a amazing experience, because the crowd were great. They were properly cheering, and an 800 for me has never felt so easy. Normally it's so difficult, but I think I was just floating on the prospect of a medal, and so I ran a PB in the 800 and got the bronze, which was awesome.
That's great. For sure, that's really great to sort of to measure the sort of progress in that way for sure. And in your aspirations, Ashleigh, what do you sort of see yourself? What are your what can you share? Obviously, I know that you've got your sort of goals and aspirations that you keep to yourself. But in Heptathlon anyway, what are your sort of goals for the future that you can sort of share with the audience, with the listeners?
Yeah. So long term, obviously, I think as with a lot of developing athletes, my goal is of course to compete in Olympic Games and the World Championships, but more in the short term I just want to keep improving, keep developing, and I just want to see how good I can be, and I feel like I haven't got to that stage where I've achieved how good I can be yet. So my goals, stepping stones and championships wise, would be I'd love to compete at Commonwealth Games and then a Worlds and an Olympics. But just if I can just keep developing year on year and getting better, then that's great.
Absolutely, yeah, be the best you can be, and for sure see where it takes you, that's for sure. And in terms of, say, one of the sort of goals we have on this show is to increase awareness and participation of sports, and I know it's sort of probably outside the scope of your remit, but if this, someone sort of listening to the show thinking they'd like to get into heptathlon, whether they sort of are, a good 800 meter runner thinking, well, I might give this a go, or maybe they're a power-based athlete thinking I'll sort of or maybe just generally just thinking I'd like to have a go. What are some of the thoughts that you can share with the listeners that are considering getting into heptathlon? Ashleigh, what sort of can they do generally? Yeah,
so I think the first thing to do, obviously if you're already an athlete doing a specific event, you're probably already part of a club and you're probably already at a track. Yeah. So if that's the case, then my advice would be to approach maybe one of the coaches, find out if they have a multi-events coach at the track, see if you could jump in and try some of the different events which you haven't tried yet. If you're not already doing athletics, then I would say maybe online look up your local club and then contact somebody there, and in the first instance speak to them. But I think the biggest thing which I found with heptathlon, which was difficult when I was young, and this would be big advice to give to all young athletes, is try not to do too much too early. Just enjoy your athletics, try out each event, but don't overload your training. Because when I was young and I decided I wanted to be a heptathlete, I was like, right, okay, let me go to the best hurdles coach I can, let me go to the best long jump coach. And I ended up just doing, a hurdler's hurdle session, a long jumper's long jump session, and in the end I ended up just getting injured. And I think the key thing with heptathlon is balance. Everything is bite-sized bits of every event. Just get a feel for it, learn the basic movements, just keep it simple. So I would just say, for any young athletes especially, just try and dip your toe into each event, do little short sessions, maybe half an hour at a time, and focus on the key principles of that event rather than getting bogged down in too much of the technical.
That's really interesting. Yeah, that's a really interesting sort of take on it in terms of, certainly I think that it's really interesting you mentioned that, because that's one of the things I sort of would have thought maybe it might be sourcing sort of certain coaches or specialists, but then I suppose like you'd mentioned there, heptathlon is a different event. It's combining them in terms of a certain duration, that's for sure. And you've obviously gone to Loughborough, and one of the world's greatest sports universities. It's famous around the world, Loughborough and that sort of stuff. And how much, how sort of significant was it for you to be able to attend Loughborough, Ashleigh?
Yeah, I think what's amazing about Loughborough is that you're constantly surrounded by some of the best athletes in the country. It's a completely high performance environment, which can only be a good thing, in terms of, you can just learn from everybody around you and seeing the accomplishments of everyone, and it just rubs off on you. And I think that's been the biggest thing. And then obviously, aside from that, the great facilities and strength and conditioning support, nutrition support, all of that side of it is a huge aspect of it as well. And then I think the only caveat to that is that I think it's very important to take breaks away from the environment, because as often everybody calls it, it's like the Loughborough bubble. You can become just completely absorbed in it, and you sort of forget to have that perspective of there is more to life than sport. I think it can sometimes become all-encompassing, but it's amazing. So as long as you take little regular breaks, just have a weekend at home, other than that, it can only be good for your progress, because you're just constantly being pushed by everybody else who's achieving such great things, which is so exciting. And
That's a really great point. That I think that sort of applies to many different sports where people start getting defined by their sport, and there's more than obviously it's really important to people to be the best they can be, and winning is really important, being the best. But it's also, I think, healthy to have a mindset where we're not defined by one thing, and we aim to be the best and be in different areas. Absolutely, for sure. But I suppose in one sense, being in that environment can only be a good thing, and then sort of recharging the batteries, and sort of then I suppose when you do recharge the batteries, do you find actually that you sort of, when you go back into training, you can put that extra sort of percent in?
100%. Yeah, definitely. I think when I have those, like, it's just nice, like, and even where I live in Loughborough, I live with some of my close friends, and when you step away from the track and you're just normal people just laughing, watching shows like Love Island or whatever, you do get those recharging the batteries, and then you're able to be then 100% at training. So I think it's a case of train hard and then recover hard.
Absolutely, that's an important point, and I'm sure that we'll sort of I'm sure our listeners will sort of keep an eye out to see how you do, and we sort of wish you every success, Ashleigh, in your future career, and it's been very kind of you to join us, and it's been really interesting to hear about your journey in the sport, and obviously psychology too. Yeah, no, it's been great to speak to you. Thank you so much. Thank you, Ashleigh. That was Ashleigh Spiliopoulou, heptathlete and psychology, studied psychology as well, sharing an insight into her career thus far, which has no doubt got many, many years to come as well, on the Friday Sports Show, 94.4 FM, with your host, Jimmy Petruzzi, Salford City Radio, 94.4 FM, the Friday Sports Show, your host, Jimmy Petruzzi.
Radio, the Friday Sports Show.